Hello, I'm Jay, owner of Volunteer Audio in Oliver Springs, Tennessee. Today we're going to show you how to install the new Soundstream HDHU.14 Plus head unit in a Harley Davidson Streetglide. At the same time, I'm also going to show you how to upgrade your front speakers. We're going to be installing a set of Hertz SX165neos. So hang out and let me take this apart and show you exactly how to do this. All right, so we've got a 2016 Harley Davidson Streetglide, and this thing is like brand new. I don't think anybody hardly ever rides it. It's got about 2,500 miles on it, and it is very, very well maintained. But we're going to take this fairing apart and swap from this older GT style radio to the new Soundstream HDHU.14 Plus. First thing we've got to do is get this outer fairing off. I've got a T27 Torx driver. I'm going to use hand tools because with power tools, you could slip off and possibly scratch something. So first, we're going to remove the 4 perimeter bolts on this side of the fairing. There's 2 on each side, one just below the speaker, and one down here at the bottom. Let's remove those. All right, you're going to notice there are actually 2 long bolts and 2 short bolts. The long bolts went at the top on each side. Let's go to the other side and pull the windshield and the upper trim. All right, so before you take this off, definitely put something down to protect your fender. We always use a Harley specific fender cover that we got at our local dealership. But a towel would do kind of the same thing, just in case you drop the tool, drop the screw. We don't want it to scratch or dent that fender. So we've got 3 bolts across the top here. Sometimes these are Phillips, sometimes they're Allen head. These are a T27 Torx, just like the bolts on the other side. Now the outer 2 ones are shorter. Always remove those first. The middle one is longer and goes all the way into the vent and basically holds all of this together. All right, so I got the 2 outside ones done. Now normally you can loosen the middle one and you can remove the windshield without actually pulling the whole fairing off. Let's get it out of the way. All right, we'll make sure and have this screw the rest of the way out. All right, so we're going to pull it off with the outer fairing. Disconnect your headlight, any added-on lights that have been done. All right, set our fairing to the side. All right, now that we have our fairing off, this is our factory radio. So a few things in a way we're going to have to take off. We're going to take this upper vent off next. That's going to give us a little bit more access to the bolts we need to get off for the plate that's mounted right above the radio. So 2 more T27 Torx, 1 on each side. Then just remove this vent. All right, at this point, we're going to be removing this metal plate off the top of the radio. We're going to disconnect the wiring from the gauges and get the 2 outer bolts on each side and 4 bolts that are here in the middle. Now these 4 Torx that are mounted down to the radio, save those as well. They're going to go right back into our new radio. These are going to be a T25. These outer ones are going to be an Allen head. I'll find which tool it is now. Now, if you have an antenna mounted here for GPS, you can remove that. Take it out when you take the radio out. You may be, once you get this new radio in, you're going to want to sell the old radio. They're worth several $100s for the old radio. So take your GPS antenna out and you'll have it to sell with it. Go ahead and disconnect all these harnesses. On each one of the gauges, there's a little push clip that just holds the harness in. You'll want to take a tool like this and disconnect it as well. Let's work the other one loose. All right. Once we have those free, we'll go ahead and unplug the harnesses. Just little clips that you lift up on each one of the outer gauges. The middle one's got one on each end. All right. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the wiring harness where it goes to the speaker pods, because we're going to be pulling those pods so we can replace the speakers as well. I'm going to go ahead and cut our zip tie loose that's holding our navigation antenna there. All right, so I'm going to go and unplug the GPS antenna. There's a little tab on the bottom side that when you push on it, it's going to release it from the back of the radio. And then using a pry tool or panel removal tool, this thing's just two-way taped onto the bottom. Just going to pry it up and off of here. If you get our amplifier kit, the amplifier is going to sit on this tray. All right, let's go ahead and remove the Torx bolts. This is our gauge cluster. We're going to remove the two bottom bolts that go to this gauge cluster. They're just going from this tray to the gauges. There's also going to be a Torx bolt right where the storage pocket comes in. It's bolted to this tray as well at the back of that storage pocket. Let's take it out. All right, so this is a 5/32 Allen on each of these outer bolts. Sometimes these are extremely tight, and sometimes they've already been stripped out or rounded out by a previous installer. All right, so after you've removed those 4 bolts, this tray will actually just come out. All right, so we've got one more Torx bolt at the top of our gauges. Go ahead and remove that and just set the gauges over to the side till we get the radio replaced. All right, so if you're just doing the radio at this point, I'm going to move forward like that's all you're doing. We'll take the speaker pods off here in a minute. So to unplug the main harness from the back of the radio, there's a little button you're going to press in, and you're going to slide this lever over and unplug it. Also, the factory USB cord, we're going to reuse it. It plugs right into our new radio. There's a button on top to press to release it. And the AM/FM antenna on the bottom has another button. You can press it and release it as well. All right, so you're going to need a 3/16 Allen tool to take the 4 bolts out of the radio. All right, so at this point, you're just going to lift the radio up and out. So now, if you're not changing out your speakers, at this point we would put the new radio directly in place, use the same bolts bolted in, and start going back together. And we're going to do that shortly, but while we're here, it's much easier to go and change the speakers while you already have the radio out. We're already halfway to it. If you have an 11 millimeter that's built into a wobble, you can get to these 3 outer bolts that hold the pods from under here without much of an issue. If you don't have that short wobble 11, at this point it is better to go ahead and remove these 2 push clips and slide this little plastic tray out of your way, and you can get straight to those bolts. Makes it much easier to get the speaker pods off without those special tools if you just take this loose, slide it out of your way. But I have the right tools, so I'm going to go ahead and take those bolts out of the pods now. All right, so it's an 11 millimeter built into a wobble. I found if I use a wobble and then stack an 11 on it, it's too long and I cannot get these bolts out. All right, so these are the bolts we're after. There are 3 on each side. You definitely want to put all of them back in. Most of the time we come behind somebody that's done this on their own and they decide it doesn't need them all. These pods are very important because they are part of the framework of this interfering, and you'll have a lot less rattling and a lot less shaking of the whole interfering if you put all these bolts back in. I can get to where I can see this bolt. Some of this you can't see, you're just going to have to feel for it. All right, that's number 2. One more in the back. All right, so we've got all 6 of the bolts out of those speaker pods on each of the bottoms. Next step, I want you to go ahead and unplug the speaker pods from your wiring harness. And anything that is still connected to the pod, as far as wiring, you need to go ahead and unclip it. That includes the cigarette lighter wiring. Sometimes it's easier just to wiggle it. Just going to unplug the cigarette lighter plug. All right, so everything's disconnected. Now all we have is to get our same, it's a 3/16 Allen head, and remove the perimeter bolts on the pod. only 3 of these left. This is our last one, and the pod will come off. And I'm going to set this pod to the side. And look, we found a stink bug. They're always hiding everywhere. All right, same thing left on the other side. I know we could have showed you one side and then we could have just said do the other side just like it, but it's not exactly the same. And you need to see how long it actually takes. Got this one right here. All right, let's take this pot out. Looks like we might have had a squirrel in here at some point, left us some nuts. All right, so our speaker pods are out, our radio's out. Now let's go ahead and show you how to swap these speakers inside the pods, and then we'll come back over and put this back together. All right, so we've got our pod that we just took out of the Harley, and we're gonna remove the speaker. See, this is a T25 Torx to take out our 4 screws. This is very simple once you get the pod out. We're going to reuse these exact 4 screws to put our new speakers in. Now we have several options on speakers, and here before long I'm going to do a video on our favorite speakers and do some testing to show you the differences between them, because not one speaker is suitable for all people. We listen to things differently. Some of us like more highs, some like more bass, some like more mid. So there are different speakers made for different applications and different personal tastes. This factory Harley speaker, I don't know if I've found anybody that really likes it yet. But let's pry it out of here. It's kind of glued in. You're going to see it's held in with 2 terminals. There's a large black terminal, that is our negative terminal. So unplug it. And then we have a small clear or white terminal that is our positive. That's going to be important when we hook our speakers back up to make sure we get our polarity correct. If you get your polarity wrong, or difference between each side, you're going to cancel out each other. You're going to have very little mid-bass. Let's compare our speakers real quick. This is our original Harley speaker. It's really a 5 1/4 with a 6.5 inch flange. Our new Hertz speaker we're installing has a much larger cone, much larger tweeter. If we compare the magnets, even though they're both a neodymium magnet, you can't really tell what's magnet and what's just metal on this one. And you have a very large magnet area on our Hertz speaker. Much larger power handling as well. This will handle up to 200 watts of peak power. We really like this speaker because it is still lightweight. It's not overly heavy because it uses a neodymium magnet. Neo isn't a term that just means more expensive. I've seen some companies throwing the word neo on amplifiers here lately, which makes no sense. Neodymium is a rare earth magnet that is at least 10 times stronger, some say up to 40 times stronger than your strontium or your ferrite magnets. Strontium is really the big one you see on most other brands that are non-neo. What that really means is 1 ounce of this magnet is comparable to 10 to 40 ounces of the magnet you'll see on these larger build speakers. Because it is so strong, a magnetic gap makes a speaker work. It handles more power. It is actually far more efficient as well, though. This one is 96.5 decibel efficient, which means we're getting 96.5 decibel off 1 watt. Where the factory speaker is very efficient, but it doesn't hold up to that higher power and it gets very distorted. And some of the other speakers that are built bigger, they're not efficient. Even though they play pretty low mid bass and they take a lot of power, if you throw them on a radio like this or even a regular sized amplifier, you're not going to get out of it what you thought you were going to get. So this is a very well-rounded speaker that gives us the most volume off of the amplification we can normally put in a Harley. And it is the loudest speaker we've tested so far on the new Soundstream Reserve radio, which is why normally we're recommending this with the radio, with or without an amp. All right, so let's put it in. The like I say, the black terminal is going to be our negative. We're always going to take a pair of pliers and we're going to grab this and we're going to squeeze it, and that's going to squeeze these terminals inside a little tighter to make sure that we don't have to worry about this vibrating loose and later having to pull this pod back off. On a street glide, this isn't a small task to get the pod back off. On a road glide, it's pretty simple. But like I say, the black one's going to go on our negative terminal, the clear one on our positive. You definitely want to put it on and make sure it doesn't easily come back off. If it does, you need to squeeze it tighter. There's a little factory nub that sticks up that lines up with our speaker. These are an exact drop-in replacement, lines up with all of our screw holes. No modification is needed. Many of the other brands are going to require you to cut or modify these pods for the speakers to fit. Now, we do have other brands we like, and like I say, subscribe to the channel. We're going to do some testing on some new speakers coming out from Soundstream. We're pretty excited about that. We're going to test some of the Infinity speakers. I think the Kappa Perfect series is a really nice motorcycle speaker as well. Kicker makes a nice 6.5-inch motorcycle speaker. So we're going to do a video where we go over all these. We're at different price points, and you know, normally you get what you pay for. So we're going to go over and see what you get at each level and what the difference is, and is it worth it to you to spend more. But this is definitely our favorite speaker. One huge thing about it as well is it does have a 3-year warranty, even on a motorcycle. It is waterproof and made for a motorcycle too, so nobody else really gives us a warranty like that. So take your 4 screws out, swap over those terminals, drop in your Hertz speaker, tighten them back up, and we're going to be ready to put the pod back in the bike. Now I am going to just do the other pod without you seeing it. It's the same process, just doing it again. And I always want to make sure when I put my speaker in that I get my logos correct, because you may see this through the grill depending on what type you have. So just put that in the right way. I'll swap the other one and we'll bolt it back in. All right, so we've got our speaker mounted in our pod. We've got our 3 outside Allen heads. I'm going to go ahead and install both pods with the outer bolts first. All right, so I'm going to tighten all 3 of them. All right, grab my other pod and do the same thing. All right, so we're back to these 3 bolts underneath. These are a little bit more difficult to do. We're going to try to start them by hand first. Line up these pods. Like I say, there's 3 on each side. Put all of them back in. Get my socket to go on. There we go. Now don't tighten them all the way until you get at least 2 started. Let's get our 3rd one in on this side. All right. Same thing on the other side. This is probably the most difficult part of this, these 3 bolts. And again, if you don't have this wobble socket, there's a push clip on each side of this. If you take that loose, you can slide this tray out and you can get to where you can look right at these bolts. It's going to make it much easier on you. than trying to fight up through this hole if you've never done it before. And if you can't find an 11 millimeter, a 7/16 is the same size. So either one would work. All right, so our pods are bolted back in. We're ready to set our radio in, get it bolted in as well. Inside the package with the radio are going to be 4 little rubber bushings. They're just isolators that center the bolts as you put them in the radio. So let me get those and put the radio in. All right, so I have my bolts and I have the little isolator bushings. I'll set my radio in the hole. So it's these little black plastic bushings. Soundstream has thought of everything. A lot of times these are stuck in the original radio, so they send you new ones. I'll start each one first. It is easier to go ahead and just put it on the end of the bolt, stick it in the hole. Once you get it lined up, just press down and it'll press through it. And you'll notice we have the 4 threaded holes on top that are going to line up with our plate later that goes on top. This is the exact size of the factory radio in every way. So we have the same gap at our fairing. Harley's never super tight on that gap, but this will be the exact way that the original radio fit. It is IPX6 rated though, so if any water did get through that crack, you don't have to worry about it damaging the radio. All right, so our radio's in and tight. Let's take a second, let's look at the back of the radio. So we have our factory connector and we're gonna have a T-harness that plugs in between here with a thumb control module. That is our main radio harness. We also have a factory USB port. So it's a weird 4-pin that's only on Harleys, but it's just gonna plug right back in, just like factory did. Our antenna has the exact antenna connection. Now we're going to have an additional part that wasn't on your original harness or your original radio. We're going to have a microphone input. Now this is kind of optional. If you're doing Bluetooth or if you want to use the voice assistant on your phone for Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, you're going to want to run a microphone. We're normally going to stick it right up here. We're going to adhere it with a 2-way sticky tape that comes with it right up here and run the wire down into the radio. It's going to plug in here. We also have 3 pairs of RCA jacks. These are low-level inputs or outputs. So you could plug an amplifier into these. And it also has 2 for a subwoofer. So you have front, rear, and sub. At Volunteer Audio, we'll most likely only use these when we're installing a subwoofer. That way we have sub control from the radio. We always run high level or speaker level in and out of our amps because it's cleaner on a Harley. It's less likely to come unplugged. And we have less likelihood of picking up noise from LED headlights or other things in the bike that are going to cause interference and noise. The RCAs, though, are very strong and do work well if you're the type that want to use an RCA. Let me get our harness and go ahead and plug our radio harness in. So as we've said in some of our other videos, and I want to make sure we're clear on this one too, plug your interface in first. If you plug it in after you've applied power, this little thumb control box, if you plug it in later, it's going to think it's hooked to the wrong radio and your thumb controls are not going to work. Let's go ahead and plug this in. This goes in just like factory. There is an additional wire here that I want to talk about because we've had people ask us about it. It's a blue wire with a special white connector on it. This particular wire is going to be an amplifier turn-on wire. So if you add an amp, this is going to turn on or signal that amp to turn on. It's also going to turn on or power a hidden antenna. So that's its purpose. That's why it is here. Go and plug the other end into our harness here. Same thing, just slides over and locks it in place. We'll take care of all this wiring here in a few minutes after we get our plate back on. All right, so our radio is mounted, bolted, and wired. So now we're going to continue to go back together. Let's go ahead and put the top bolt in that holds the gauges in. Go ahead and put this in before you do that, the metal plate. All right, so now we've got our plate set back in. You're going to see the 4 holes that line up with the radio. Start all of these before you tighten any of them. Make sure you get them all started nice and straight. All right, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them all down now that they're in here. All right, now go ahead and put the screw back in at the rear of the storage pocket. And your 2 screws go on the bottom of this gauge. All right. All right, so we're going to go back to our 5/32 Allen tool and install all of these outer bolts. All right, at this point we're going to go ahead and plug all of our harnesses back in, so just put them back where you originally removed them from. This isn't the most exciting thing to do, but it's going to save you a lot of money. It's going to make you confident you can put your own radio and speakers in. And at the end, you're going to have an excellent result. And the exciting part is going to be when you ride down the road and you get to take a listen to it. So I'm going to plug in all of our speaker connectors. We're going to plug back in our cigarette lighter connector. So everything up here is plugged back in and back where it used to be. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put our vent back in place overhead. Just going to put it back in. so I got you most of the way there. The only things left is we're going to secure this wiring up and make it look nice before we put the fairing back on, and we're going to mount our microphone. Next step to this install, we're going to install our plug-and-play Hertz HMP4D that's specifically made and wired up and set in every way just for this Soundstream Reserve HDHU.14 radio. Instead of putting the fairing back on now, I'm going to leave it off. If you want to see it go back on, watch the next video when I install the amplifier. We're also going to make a video where we do the cut kits in the rear bags and add on the 6x9s. So definitely watch the next video and you'll see the rest of the install. Alright, so that wraps up the step-by-step installation of our Soundstream Reserve HDHU.14 radio and our 6.5-inch Hertz SX165neo speakers in this 2016 Streetglide. Beautiful bike. Watch the next video. The next one we're going to add on our plug-and-play amplifier, and then we'll do a third video on this build where we do the rear backbone harness, correct wiring for our 6x9s, and we're going to cut those into the lids and use a cut kit. So if you want to learn how to do an entire install on your bike, come back and watch the other videos. If this video helped you, if it made you feel more confident, please like it, share it with your friends, and definitely subscribe to our channel. Any words of encouragement are also appreciated, and any comments you have will be quick to answer. You can find this radio and this package specifically at volunteeraudio.com, or you can call us at 1-844-30-AUDIO if you have any questions. It's two things we love talking about around here. That's audio on Harleys and Jesus. So call us and we'll talk about either one you want to go over. Thank you for watching, and God bless.